Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Welcome, Dave.
Yes. What's going on, everybody? Thank you for having me on, Mr. Sandsman. The channel, Mr. Sandsman. I love it. Thanks for having me on, Darren. Excited to be here. Your first guest.
Yep, my first guest. This is my third live episode. And what I wanted to do was talk about something that's quite close to me, which are the video nasties and this kind of moral panic that we had here in the UK in the 1980s, whereas a lot of movies that you guys in Canada and the US were readily accessing were considered in violation of the Obscene Publications Act in the UK. And a lot of these movies were banned and taken off shelves, and people went to prison, and there was all sorts of problems.
That's right.
With this. I sent you a documentary yesterday, or the day before, I think it was, to have a look at. And I think you watched it, right?
I did.
And you did. How much were you aware of the video nasties before you saw that documentary?
I had never heard of the term video nasties until you brought it up. And not just recently, but, you know, like a few years ago on some show we were doing together with Frank or something like that. I had never heard of something called the video nasties. And I love the term. Like, I love video nasties. It's so British. Nasty.
I think it was actually coined by a journalist.
Okay.
In the late 70s, he was doing an article on something, and he used the term video nasties, and it was then adopted as the kind of overarching title for some of the movies we're going to talk about today.
Right.
Of which there were around about 155 titles that were flagged at the time. Right. So, I mean, this comes around the time when video was booming, and VHS recorders, where people were buying them or renting them and putting them in their homes. And small independent distributors started to flourish in this time with releasing movies on VHS, and a lot of them were kind of cheap horror movies,
right?
And what happened subsequently was that people started, you know, they were unregulated.
Yeah,
like when you go to the cinema, you get a rating. In Canada, you would get, what is it, a 14 and a 16 and an M or something like that.
14, 18, PG, G, 18A, all that stuff.
And in the UK, you would get a rating such as back then it would be UA AA X.
Right,
and then in the US it was an R rating, it was a PG-13, although that didn't come in until the sort of early 80s, mid 80s. And so, you know, none of these ratings actually transferred to home video at all. Nobody was in charge of what was going on on VHS.
Right.
And so we had a slew of movies that were released that, because there was no age rating on them, anybody could access them.
Yes.
And so you had kids renting these things. You had artwork that was unregulated as well, and we'll get into some of the artwork later on, with some of the most horrific imagery on them.
Yes.
But the way that the government in the UK went about banning these movies was a kind of campaign of, they got these think tanks involved, and it was a campaign of, in some instances, falsifying evidence to match their narrative. But so initially there was a list which was drawn up, which had 72 titles on it.
Right.
Okay. This was the DPP's list, the Department of Public Prosecution, and they drew up a list of 72 titles, which you could be taken to court over. You could go to prison over if you were caught distributing this sort of thing. And they actually prosecuted, I think, 33 titles. And some of the, I mean, it's outrageous. I mean, when you look at some of these titles, they were titles like the Burning, Cannibal Apocalypse, Cannibal Ferox, Cannibal Holocaust, Don't Go in the Woods, Zombie Flesh Eaters, Faces of Death, things like that. I mean, some of these movies were utter trash.
Yes.
Some of them
Like Don't Go Into the Woods.
Yeah, like Don't Go Into the Woods.
One of the worst movies I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, exactly. Some of them were just didn't live up to the promise of what the artwork offered. And, but the majority of these movies are now available in the UK, uncut and to purchase. There's just a few, a handful that aren't, which I'm going to cover in another episode. I Spit on Your Grave was another title which was part of this list.
Classic.
Yeah. Tenebrae. Dario Argento's Tenebrae, one of my favorite nasty movies, was on the list as well. So what I thought we would do is I asked you to look at the list and come up with 5 titles, which you would deem your favorite. I'm
already being sued by just looking at the list. It's incredible.
The list is incredible. Like I say, the initial list was 72 titles. 33 of those titles were prosecuted, and 39 remaining titles went onto a list called a Section 2 list, which meant that you could still be prosecuted, but you wouldn't get charged if you owned up to distributing these films, and you forfeited all of your stock. Okay, so you would have to, and they would be burnt. They sent them to an incinerator in North London and burnt them all.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
I was just gonna say, watching that documentary was really eye-opening, because it really gives you insight into how serious this was. I mean, this was not just, like over here, like I said to you yesterday, some of the response from some of the, the parents and the, the families and things like that reminded me a little bit of being in the 80s, and not my parents, of course, but certain parents of my friends getting their knickers in a twist, as the English like to say, over just A Nightmare on Elm Street, or Friday the 13th Part 2, which actually is on the Nasties list, but I just mean like over more kind of mainstream sort of kind of regular, not necessarily so I can only imagine what that would have been like, over, in England, with all these real exploitative underground, you got like, shh, quiet. Like I can only, because again, I experienced a little bit of that, but not with those titles necessarily, but was sort of the more mainstream, I guess. But what a fascinating doc to just kind of see how everybody, and it just, in retrospect, you look at it now and you think, God, what would they have thought of Terrifier? I mean, but
I mean, nowadays, Terrifier, just because the kind of, the thing that came out of this was the Video Recordings Act, which meant that everything had to have a rating, had to go through the classification board. It had to have a rating before you could put it in a shop.
Right.
Nowadays, because of, I think a lot of it's because of this, they're a lot more lenient on violence. Now, you might get an 18, which is a restrictive category, but nothing rarely gets cut these days unless it's sexual violence. They're really big on that. And Terrifier doesn't really do sexual violence. It might do violence where people are naked.
Yes.
But there's no kind of assault theme or anything like that to it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and I guess you could make the argument that it's violence against women, because obviously women tend to be the heroines and sort of the main protagonists in a lot of slasher or splatter or whatever you want to call it, horror films. And so with the Terrifier franchise, I guess they're not necessarily the lead, although she does take her bumps and bruises, but certainly some of the other women in the films that have been dare I say sawn in half, or sawed in half, so that I could I
but
can only
imagine. Again, a lot of that is down to
they're naked though, so
the way, but also the way that it's filmed. I mean, and also, is it played for any sort of titillation or anything like that?
Right.
And it's not. It clearly isn't. And it's also Art the Clown's almost like a fantasy figure as well. So
Right.
that I mean, fantasy as in he's kind of, you know, fantastical, if you like,
Right.
rather than somebody's fantasy.
Right.
So yeah, they are kind of lenient on Art the Clown because they do see it as this kind of overblown, over the top a character that's doing ridiculous things, and a lot of it is played for laughs at times.
Right.
Whereas if you take a movie like I Spit on Your Grave,
Yes.
that's a different kettle of fish altogether.
Right.
So you know that there are different kind of ways of looking at these films, and so we're in a position now in the UK, whereas we're quite lucky that we get away with a lot more than what we used to do, and the majority of things these days are past uncut. Whereas in a lot of territories, you know, particularly when you get to the Middle East and places like that, all sorts of things have to be cut.
Right. Right.
So yeah, so it can be, it has been a good thing. It's just the way they went about it was incredibly laborious. It took years for this all to go away. It got to a point whereas people didn't know what was and what wasn't banned because things were coming off the list and then going back on, and so video stores couldn't keep up with it. And also when video distributors were taken to court, some of these companies were so small that they couldn't afford to defend themselves. And so they had to take the charges and go out of business in a lot of cases. But what also, I mean, like when a third list was put together called Section 3, which has some more kind of popular titles, things like Dawn of the Dead, Final Exam, Friday the 13th Part 2, Graduation Day, Happy Birthday to Me, The Hills Have Eyes, Phantasm, Prom Night, Rabid, The Prowler, Texas Chainsaw, The Thing even as well, Extra. All these kind of really popular mainstream horror movies were all at threat as well.
Right.
And what they said to video owners there was, you can forfeit these titles and you won't go to court. So Section 2, you would go to court, but you wouldn't get charged. But Section 3, you would just lose all your stock.
Right.
Which was ridiculous. So the bigger companies like Universal, Paramount, companies like that would take their titles back, resubmit them once the Video Recordings Act came in, and they would have the right credentials on their 18, 15, whatever the rating was, and people could rent them. But it meant that in some cases they were butchered. You know, there was a lot of stuff
really
taken
cut
out.
down.
Yeah. So that's a kind of brief history of it all. The one thing I just want to show you before we do this is one of the people that was the kind of like ringleader in all of this. It was an MP called Sir Gray. He's knighted now. I can't believe he's fucking knighted.
He's knighted. I thought you were going to say he's 90.
No, he's knighted. Oh, he probably is about 90 now. But this is him talking back in the 80s about his thoughts on video nasties. And this is what we were up against. Watch this.
Research is taking place, and it will show that these films not only affect young people, but I believe they affect adults as well.
I mean, who's to say, right? I mean, dogs, cats, chickens, birds, iguanas.
Exactly. You know? I mean,
I would really I think my follow-up question would have been, and where is your evidence for that?
Exactly.
I think,
exactly.
You know,
and he does say, and this is a point the documentary makes, is he does say it will show. The research will show.
Right.
And it's like, you're preempting it. You don't know what that research is going to show.
That's right.
And consequently, they went round schools, and there's footage of this on the documentary. They went round schools asking kids of between the ages of, I think it was like 8 and 15 or something. It was something like that. If they'd seen certain titles on this list. So what they did was they threw a few nasty titles on there and then made up a bunch of titles. And the kids were telling the people doing the survey that they'd seen, I don't know, Madman versus Tyrannosaurus or whatever the title would be. And there was no such movie. No, so the research was just wrong.
Right. And the kids wanted to feel cool, I think. They wanted to be like, oh, I've seen that. I've seen that title.
Yeah.
Attack of the Killer Chickens. Yeah, I've seen that. It doesn't exist, you know.
So let's have a look at the 5 that you've chosen, and we'll delve into the history of these titles a little bit. Here we go. Your first one is
Prom Night. Yes, Prom Night. This is, I much prefer this over Terror Train in terms of Jamie Lee Curtis horror movies. Yeah, this is what, again, I haven't seen it in a while, but I remember liking this movie. It's got kind of a, creepy killer on the phone. Wendy, a little bit of Billy in there, maybe perhaps. And this was when Jamie Lee Curtis was really in that. I don't know if I'm going to do anything else other than horror movies. But I've always liked it. There's a remake to this, right?
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
I haven't seen the remake, so I don't know.
The remake's like a kind of really watered down PG-13 version. It's not that great.
Okay. But this was violent, I mean, it showed, I mean, not ultra violent, but I mean, it did show, violence. And I like the premise. I'm a sucker for, not that it's one location, but when it gets to the prom, it's one location, and everybody's at the prom and everybody's dying one by one kind of thing. There's this mass killer. What's going on? And who is this guy with the creepy phone calls? And I like that vibe. I like the moodiness of it. And it's not boring like Terror Train. And so, yeah, I've always really, it's not one that I've talked a lot about on my own channel, funny enough, but going through the list and seeing it on there, I was like, oh yeah, Prom Night. Yeah. Prom Night. Yeah.
It's good. I mean, like, this was originally classified in the UK as an X-rated for cinema exhibition.
Right.
And that was back in 1980. And then Embassy released it on VHS in 1981, uncut.
Yes.
Completely uncut. And it ended up on the Section 3 list, which meant that a lot of the bigger companies pulled the titles back themselves.
Right.
And what they would do is they would take the movie, resubmit it to the BBFC, have them put an official rating on it, and they would change the inside of the VHS and send it back out.
Right.
They'd take the spools out and then send it back out, and you would get like a stamp, a library stamp on the VHS to say that it had been sent back and it had been addressed. And if you look at the cover here on Prom Night, you can see that there are 18 rated stickers on there.
Yes.
So those are what the BBFC would issue to the companies to stick on their cover art, and that would get them through that period of time.
Right.
But eventually, as time went on, it was re-released on VHS in 1987. And with that, they would have produced the proper artwork with the official certificates all over it.
And they weren't fooling around here either. I mean, you got 18 on the front, 18 on the spine, 18 on the back. I mean, they wanted to make sure that you knew.
Yeah. And nowadays, it's even more thorough than that, I think. Yeah. You get an example of the reasons why it's rated,
right.
Strong,
well, on the back there, I think it even says. Yeah.
There was a lot of titles that I think The Thing was one of those titles as well, which Universal pulled back and withdrew it themselves rather than having the distributor or the video stores do it. But what would happen is you would go to a video store, and if there was a movie that was on the banned list, you'd get to know the owner, and eventually they would, get a brown paper bag out from under the counter, and you'd have that filmed. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Totally burnt or destroyed at some point.
And you felt like, especially if you were a kid, I mean, maybe not as an adult, but especially if you were a kid, you felt like you had. It was so, I've got this big secret, and it was terrifying at the same time. Yes, exactly.
It made them, it made you want to see them more.
It did.
And everybody, like, if like people who take drugs, they have a dealer. Back then in the mid 80s, growing up, I had a dealer. I had a guy that I would go to, and I'd meet him late at night underneath the clock tower in Shipley Town Centre, and he knows who he is. He tunes into the channel now and again.
Aaron was 6 years old.
And he would have a list. He would have a list of every title that he would have, and I would be a paper boy or a milk boy, whatever I was back then in the mid 80s. And I would save all my money up, and I would buy the dodgiest VHSs off this guy that I meet in the middle of the town center. And
that sounds like a movie right there.
And they weren't originals either, because they would be like 5th or 6th generation copies or something like that. And you'd get home, and what he would do as a kind of special treat is he would put like a compilation of the other titles that he's got and show you some of the more graphic bits. Do you know what I mean? In a kind of little montage. Yeah. And so next time I went to meet him, I'd go, oh yeah, so you have Cannibal Apocalypse. I'll ring him up at home. Can you do me Cannibal Apocalypse? Yeah, sure. So I'd meet him down there. You do know it's uncut. Brilliant. I'm down there. Yeah. And it was like, and that's how you would do it. And these lists would be going around at school, and everybody would have one, and you'd be like, oh, you'd take them off once you'd seen them. And it was,
you'd probably have to hide the list from the teachers, and or were the teachers into it?
Well, no, I remember one day at school, we did actually, and this wasn't a nasty, but somebody in our class had let's say a pirate copy of RoboCop, and we watched it in the class on the last day of term.
And the two scenes that you probably watched over and over again was the hand exploding from the gunshot and the guy getting shot in the office.
Exactly.
You have 5 seconds to comply. I used to watch that on repeat, like, because in those days it was. Now it was like, oh my! Like when his hand exploded, I was like, oh.
Yeah. It is amazing. There's some great stuff in that film. Yeah. But that's what it was like. The outrage about these movies just made people want to see them even more.
Yeah.
And the fact that you could get into bother for that, you could get into trouble for it.
Yeah.
People went to prison. And there was a point where, as they were prosecuting the Evil Dead at Snaresbrook Court in London, and Sam Raimi actually flew in to go in the dock. But he didn't get that far. The judge wouldn't allow him. And so what happened was Palace Pictures, who were distributing the movie Evil Dead, they arranged for the judge to see the film. And he deemed it to be not offensive at all. He saw the fact that this was you've seen the movie. Half of it's made out of plasticine, for God's sake.
Of course. I wonder how many of the movies... and probably quite a few, like parents in a lot of ways, right? Your parents, not necessarily, your parents or my parents, but, generally speaking, parents sort of just kind of, they see it's more the reputation of maybe a few movies that have started a trend. And then there are some horror movies that are not so bad, but now every movie gets lumped into sort of the same category. And there's probably a lot of people making the decisions, whether it's on behalf of what gets released, like the laws, or even parents that probably they haven't seen the movies they are banning in a lot of ways.
Well,
they're just it. It's guilty by association, in some ways.
A lot of people were outraged and hadn't seen and refused to watch the films, but they were outraged about it. And there's even one of the stories that the MP tells is that he, in order to get build up a support for his campaign to ban these films, he got the police to do a compilation tape of all the worst bits of the movies, okay, and played it in Parliament. And people were vomiting in Parliament, supposedly. And it's like, if you take all the worst, nastiest bits out of all these horror films and put them all into 1 hour-long presentation, it's going to be shocking. Of course it is. Out of context like that.
Now, that's a movie I want to see.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So that's the kind of thing that we were up against and we were dealing with back then, was just people just getting so carried away. Yeah. Yeah. It was like the Wild West.
I love this. Notorious for Leslie Nielsen dancing.
Oh, that's a moment there. He's just dancing with Jamie Lee Curtis throughout the whole scene. I loved the slashers back then because they would all put like a semi-famous celebrity in them. They all sort of, like
give it some credibility.
Yeah, exactly. Like Happy Birthday to Me. I think it was Happy Birthday to Me, or was it? I think it was, had Glenn Ford in it. You know,
Might
the
have
guy
been.
who played Superman's dad in.
Yeah. Yeah, it might have been. It might have
Yeah,
been.
they did. They would always have like a senior kind of well-known cast member in there,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
just to give it that little bit of credibility.
Yep.
Should we have a look at the chat before we move on?
Sure.
Let's see what people
Yeah, let's
say.
do it.
Just wondering whether people think we're actually live or pre-recorded.
Let's keep the mystery going.
yeah. Thanks everybody for joining. There's 54 of us in here at the moment.
Oh,
Brandon says, I love Terror Train. I have original one sheet on my wall.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Brandon. I don't know what happened there.
Terror Train's one of those ones I could never get my head around as a slasher. I think it's pretty it's one of the lamest ones, but
I mean, it's not the worst movie I've ever seen. I mean, obviously I poke fun at it just for the sake of being funny, but I do mean it. It's not a film that I've tried. It's one of those movies where I've tried watching a few times. It's not awful, but I'm just like, it's just dull. I'm just I'm just kind of bored. I don't know. I've never really been able to glom on to the original Terror Train.
Yeah. There was a few years after the Video Nasties outrage, it kind of came back again because of a few instances. There was a mass shooting in a town in the UK, and so they kind of linked that back to the Rambo movies.
Oh, of course.
And then there was a kid that was killed in I think it was the early 90s. It's a famous case in the UK, the Bulger case. And supposedly the two young boys who were all 8 or 9 years old, who killed this young kid who was like 2 or 3, I think, at the time. They took him from a mall, and they'd supposedly seen Child's Play 3. So that was banned then. Child's Play 3 was removed from our shelves. So it just continually, you know, they were just they were looking for answers through movies, right, and not addressing the real problem there, you know,
right? Because it has to be the movies and nothing else.
Yeah.
You know, right.
And as Sean says, Child's Play 3 was one of them. I think because of the James Bulger incident, I believe. I was born in '89, so me and my mate were like, "We have Child's Play 3, proper hard." But Child's Play 3 is one of the worst in the series.
Yeah. Oh, it's probably the last semi-okay one, once, you know, before you get the Seed and Bride and whatever else is going on.
Okay, should we move on to your next choice?
Let's do it. Alice, Sweet Alice. I really like this movie. I think it's not nearly as violent. Although, no, it's a slower burn. It's like an hour and 45 minutes or something like that. So it's a bit of a longer film. And this is one that, you know, has got a twist. If you haven't seen it, I won't tell you what the twist is. I'll try to kind of not go there. The girl that plays Alice, you can see her in the top left. I guess she's in the top two. When you watch this movie, she's actually she's and I can understand why. She's playing somebody who is, I'm guessing, again, it's been a little bit since I've seen it, but I think it's somebody who's 13, 14, I think is who she's playing. She's actually 19 years old in this movie, and she looks as every bit of 12 or 13 as you can possibly imagine. Yeah. When I found out that she was 19, I'm like, 19? And you understand why, once you see some of the things they have the actress do, why she had to be of age. But I just remember thinking, she does not look 19, like not even close to 19 at all. Yeah. And I was blown away by her being 19. She only did, at least according to her IMDb, one other film after this. She never had a career as an actress. I think she went on to become a doctor or something like that. She's still alive. I believe she's in her late 60s. And the director of this movie was inspired by that, the one that you really like, Darren, that you got me to watch that now I really like. Don't Look Now. Don't Look Now. Yeah. He was apparently inspired by Don't Look Now, 1973 or so. And when you watch Alice, Sweet Alice, or Communion as it was known in the UK, I guess, you can see some of the similarities, even with the fact that the killer runs around in a yellow rain slicker. Of course, there was the red sort of hoodie slicker outfit or whatever it was in Don't Look Now. There's some really tense moments in this film. There's one line in this movie that if you and Frank ever did a best and worst of, I'm not going to repeat the line because I'm trying to think of your algorithms, but it's a line where it's just so funny and out there, and it would be everybody's best or worst line depending on how you want to look at it.
Yeah.
But the gentleman on the cover there, the big fat guy, he plays their landlord in the movie. He died actually only about 2 years after the making of this movie, and which doesn't really surprise me when you look at how fat he is.
Yeah.
I don't know how to say it. Big guy. But yeah, there's just lots of little twists, and the performance from, I forget her name now, begins with a P. Pamela Lynn, I think is her name, the actress's name. She does really well. And of course, Brooke Shields is in this movie.
Yes.
And Brooke Shields, a very, very young Brooke Shields, who is the sister. She plays Karen, who is the sister of Alice. And again, I won't say, because I don't know who's seen it and who hasn't. I mean, I guess I could spoil it. It's 50 years old, but I don't know if anybody has seen this or not, and maybe they want to check it out. But the cops are led to believe that Alice is not as sweet as she is, and then there's a twist, and there's a whole kind of thing, and it's pretty good. It's pretty good. I mean, for a time, it's pretty good. What do you think about it, Darren?
I like the film. It's something I only watched fairly recently. I was confused when you said Alice, Sweet Alice, because I was looking on the nasty list and I'd forgotten it was called Communion in this country. Yeah. The Arrow have just brought out a really cool 4K. I think it's 4K. Is it 4K?
Yeah,
or a Blu-ray that they've just done, which I may try and get hold of. But this was a Section 3, and just to read you the log line on a Section 3 video nasty, it says the video was seized subject to an Obscene Publications Act Section 3 seizure order. This is a legal gambit whereby victims admitted that the videos were obscene and therefore subject to seizure, in return for that being the end of the matter, and so avoiding an obscenity trial with the possibility of jail time.
Wow.
That is hard for a movie that's
hard.
When you look at it, I looked at the kill count today, 4 kills throughout this whole movie, and
it's really only the last one.
Yes.
That is that last one, that shocked me. The first time I watched the movie, the priest. Yeah. Spoiler alert, whatever.
Yeah.
50
years old.
Who cares? It's shocking because it just comes out of nowhere. And then I think were there two end credit versions of this movie, where one where there's music and one where there's not. The one I've seen is the one where Alice because she puts the knife in the bag and then she just looks at the camera and it's a still frame and the credits roll with no music. And I always found that really, really creepy. You know what I mean? Yeah. But that's wild. Yeah. Cause it's not a violent film in comparison to some of the films that are on this list.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, Alice, Sweet Alice is a bit of I guess it kind of works. I think it misdirects. I think Communion probably makes more sense because of what happens at the beginning of the movie and then what happens at the end of the movie during Communion. Yeah. But it's one, I don't think I like it maybe as much as Don't Look Now, but it's certainly one of those ones that is good. It's all right.
Yeah. It's a decent movie, whereas there's a lot of shit on this list.
It's a lot of shit. And Pamela Lynn, I think her name is, anyway, who plays Alice. She was really good. Like, as a young actress, she was really good. She really, really good. I really liked her and thought she was great.
Cool. So a bit of history on this one. So this in the UK was classed as an X uncut. And it was released on VHS in 1982 uncut, which then obviously it would have been subsequently withdrawn and then resubmitted later. This was then released on VHS in 1998. So I think it was a long time it was off the shelves. So you're talking, I think the Video Recordings Act came in 1984. So it would have been taken out between 83 and 85, I think. Right. Come back in 1998. And when it came back, it ended up being cut. For around about people, you look online, there's a bit of kind of debate as to how much was cut, but it's essentially a scene of cruelty to a cat. There's a scene
yes,
where somebody's kind of like throttling a cat, I think,
no,
or swinging a cat round or something.
It's Alice when she goes to visit. So the guy on the cover there, he's the landlord of Alice and her mom in this apartment building. He's a character. He reminds me of the guy that they find dead in Seven. You know what I mean? And so he's a character in and of itself, and he's a crazy cat guy, I guess. He's got all these cats, but he's a scuzzy, slimy, perverted dude, and he comes on to Alice, who the actress is 19, but the character again is, I mean, she's just had her, I think they say in the movie she just got her period. So how old is she? Yeah, I mean, between 12 and 14, probably somewhere in there. And so, you know, he comes on to her when she goes over there to, I forget why she's over there, maybe to deliver a check or rent or something like that. And he's scuzzy and he comes on to her and he pushes her up against the door. And it's really disturbing because of how old the character is.
Yeah.
And then I think she knees him in the balls or something, I don't know, something like that. And she picks up one of the cats and like breaks its neck and like it's a kitten or whatever it is and tosses it. It was really like, whoa. You know what I mean? It was like, wow, like something kind of, it was something like that. I don't think she threw it around, but it was something like she just took it and, you know, and then dropped it on the ground or something.
It was an actual cat. It's clearly a cat. I mean, it must be if they insisted they cut it out. It must have been a real cat that they used in that sequence. Given it's the late 70s, I would imagine it might have been.
Now, whether they killed a real cat, I don't know. Whether it was a real cat in her hand,
yes.
Perhaps.
Oh, no. I'm saying the initial shot of her grabbing
the cat would have been a real cat. Yes. Not actually killed, but the idea was that the cat was killed, and he was like,
when you get to Friday the 13th,
oh,
we'll talk about
God,
that in a minute. Yeah,
and I'm not. I still can't. I only found that out like 5 years ago. I'm still not over it.
So it was finally released uncut. So they kind of BBFC kind of got over their hang up with the cat being startled in 2014 and was released uncut.
Yeah, and the were pre-stabbed in the neck. Oh yeah, you have it right there. I completely missed it.
The most notorious moment in the film because it's so. Oh yeah. It's what's really weird about it's in a room full of people in broad daylight and splat right there.
Now, some of the acting, for those of you that maybe are a bit younger and that haven't seen this movie but love these kind of movies, some of the acting is not necessarily from Alice, but some of the acting from some of the supporting characters, as you do get in a lot of these low budget older films from the 70s. Some of the acting can be very theatrical. And like there's a scene in the hospital when Alice's aunt, which is her mother's sister, has been attacked, who they believe is by Alice or whatever, and she's in the hospital, and the detective is there, and then her husband, I forget the aunt's name, but her husband comes in and she's like pale white, you can see the makeup on her, and she's looking at her husband and she's like, he's like, tell me, who did it? Who did this to you? And she goes, it was Alice! And then it cuts back to the detective going, and you hear like, Alice! And I'm, I just remember thinking, wow, this is like stage Broadway, give the Tony to her now kind of thing, and so there's not, it's not like strewing through this, but there's moments of it, so in these older horror movies sometimes you get a little bit of those theatrics, and this is no exception. So anyways, sorry for people's eardrums, but just had to get
I think it was Jordan that said she did kill the cat, that it took 57 takes.
No, could you imagine?
57 cats.
57 cats dead.
I did put a link to the Video Nasties Wikipedia page, folks, in the chat. And within that, you can actually see all the titles of the 150, the three sections. You can see all the titles laid out there and little bits of history from them.
Yeah.
So yeah, Communion or Alice Sweet Alice. You've made me want to get that Arrow version now.
Yeah, I made myself now kind of want to pick it up.
Add that to the list. Okay, next film is
The Hills Have Eyes. The original Hills Have Eyes, which, by the way, the remake of this movie is one of the better remakes of those movies, period. But this, of course, directed by Wes Craven, one of his movies from that era. And it's again another one. I think I've seen the remake more recently than I've seen the original. But it's a good movie. It's a good movie. I mean, it's creepy, and it's that cannibalistic, that sort of cannibal type apocalyptic, isolated in the desert kind of, scenario. Obviously, I mean, everybody knows what, the story is. But it's good. And I've always really liked this film. I think I like it actually better than, although maybe this isn't quite fair, because I was going to say I like it better than Last House on the Left, which I think I do. I think Last House on the Left, although it's that classic, it's very dated now, very, very dated, that original film. Still worth a watch for sure, but very dated. But The Hills Have Eyes, the original, still holds up. Always liked it, always appreciated it. I don't own it, funny enough, but and I've always really loved, even just the title is eerie. The Hills Have Eyes.
Yes.
I just think that just from that title alone, it's so eerie, I mean, and take away the movie, just say you've never seen the movie, you've never heard of the movie, just that title, The Hills Have Eyes. It says so. There's somebody watching you, or somebody watching you from them damn hills, but there's somebody out there, there's something or somebody, or
you're being watched.
There's that voyeuristic, maybe not voyeuristic, that usually has a sexual component to it, but there's a you're being watched, your privacy's being invaded, and there's nothing more terrifying, I don't think, than being in a situation where you're vulnerable like that. You're out there, you're by yourself. It's almost like, I don't know. And I say this with all due respect to anybody who's Mexican who watches this, but like driving into Mexico and you get caught with like the drug cartel or something, in the middle of some rural area, and you get pulled over by you, because there's a lot of that stuff that can happen. Those, like,
Australia.
Yeah.
So many people go missing in the outback in Australia.
Yeah. And it can be so, it's just, you really got to be careful, man. And this reminds me of that kind of thing where you're out there and everything seems to be okay, and then it's not, and it's a good film. It's a good film. Really, I've always really appreciated it.
It is. And it has a bit of a kind of checkered history with censorship in the UK, because what we got in the UK on release, in the cinema release, was around about 1978, and it was rated X, but it was cut.
Yeah.
So what we got was the R-rated cut. Okay. And the R-rated cut is cut. So the US version, the R-rated cut that Wes Craven put into cinemas, and I don't think has been seen. So the version he first submitted has never been seen. Okay.
Wow.
He had to cut the film 4 times. In 5 different places, in order to get an R rating. And if you have the DVD commentary, he talks about what he had to cut initially to get the R rating, which was around about 32 minutes in. When Fred's beaten to death by Jupiter, we had a lot more of it, and we had to cut it back, way back. This is then followed by Big Bob finding Fred's body hanging on the back of the door. Wes Craven said this shot had to be cut short, as I remember. And then about 55 minutes in, Mars and Pluto kidnap the baby. Peter Locke said this sequence got edited down and edited down and edited down for us to get an R rating. And then at 67 minutes, Jupiter eats Big Bob's arm and taunts his charred body. Wes Craven said, yeah, there was a shot where he was gesturing, sticking Bob's own fingers in his face, holding his arm. Peter Locke said he's eating his forearm while he's speaking. This scene really, I remember it so differently, with him thrusting Bob's arm into his face and finger into his eye. Jupiter is shown taking a bite from Bob's arm. He said, there's one bite we have, but you don't see that, Wes Craven said. I think they never allowed us to show the arm as severed. So there was a lot of work on that scene there. And then at 83 minutes, Katie hits Jupiter in the back with an axe. This got edited down to get an R. So all that stuff they cut out back in 1977 is gone, I think.
It's gone. And
I don't think it's ever been seen. And so we got the R-rated cut that was sanitized, and they further sanitized it for the UK release, which included the sight of a man's ankle after a mauling by a dog, and the sight of a man being repeatedly stabbed at the end of the film was deleted. So,
you know, the 50th anniversary is coming up in a couple of years, and it would be great if that stuff really, if it still did exist and they packaged like this ultimate cut.
Yeah.
That would be really cool.
I would imagine it's gone as a lot of specifically back then. Nowadays it's a lot easier because you're editing on Avids and things like that. It's easy to hang on to this stuff, but back then you were just pieces of film.
That's true. That is true. That's where the term cutting room floor comes from. I mean, you literally cut. You know, I don't know what they teach now in film school. I don't know if they teach like a semester or I'm sure that you could still shoot film in film school, but I remember being in film school and shooting a 16mm film and literally having to use the Steinbeck and cut the film and use Scotch tape to tape the scenes together. You know, that's how, I mean, that's how they did it. Really, really cool.
Splicing tape.
Splicing.
And then,
or
and then
not Scotch tape from Walmart. no, splicing tape. Correct. Tape. Yeah. But it was like Scotch tape. It was that kind of thing. Yeah.
And then they re-released it in 1987 and cut it further.
Incredible.
So it was released on VHS. Obviously, when it was withdrawn, they put it back out there with an 18 rating, and there were cuts made to a brief shot of Mars sticking his gun in Brenda's mouth and then pulling the trigger. It doesn't fire though, as it was unloaded. So they had that scene of threat, I guess, and trauma taken out.
And I remember, you know, when I was a kid, Michael Berryman, I mean, what great casting for Pluto. And I remember, but as a kid, and I think, I don't know if I'm the only one, but I think I had never heard of him. I'd never seen him before. And I didn't realize he really looked like that. I thought it was prosthetics. And I say that with all due respect. I'm not trying to be, you know, rude to the man, but as a naive child, you know, I just thought this was, you know, I mean, let's be honest, that's why he was cast in the role. And why he often, and he knows this, he's not stupid. It's why he gets cast in roles like that over the years is because of his, you know, unorthodox look and the way he looks.
And good luck to him for that, you know?
Yeah,
and he's a sweetheart. Everybody that meets him says how, I mean, Frank, he was at the convention that Frank and I went to last year. Frank met him and had a really good chat with him. And he's actually really open. If you watch online, you can watch Q&As with him. He's really open about the condition that he had. And it's all to do with like his, something to do with his skin, not, he doesn't sweat or anything like that. Something to do with I don't know, the moisture in his body or something, which makes him, there's a name for it. And he does talk very openly about it. But everybody that I know and Colin in the chat was there, Colin Murdy, he was at the convention with us last year, and he spent some time with him as well and said what a sweetheart he was.
Oh yeah, I've heard great things about it. I've seen interviews with him. He seems like such a nice man. But I remember it was probably not till I was maybe in my mid-teens when I actually found out that, because I think I saw him in another movie and I was like, why does he look the same? Like, why does he have the same makeup that he had in The Hills Have Eyes? And then I realized, oh no, this is what he looks like.
And
I thought, oh, that's really cool. But yeah, the father, burning at the end of the movie. I mean, what a
yeah.
man.
It's I think it's earlier on, isn't it? I think is it about midway through or something like that? I think it is.
Why am I
but
thinking it's at the end for some reason? Okay.
Yeah, it may
Anyway.
because it happens to be in the remake. It's Ted Levine that it happens to, and
Right.
He burns alive, and his eyes turn white with the heat and everything. Colin says he's a lovely guy, so friendly, and took a lot of time talking with me at the con in Manchester last year. He hasn't got sweat glands.
He hasn't got sweat glands. Wow.
And Debbie follows up and says, "Isn't it Marfan syndrome?" I think it could be. I couldn't think of the name.
Perhaps, yeah.
Daz says The Hills of Eyes does nothing for me. The remake is better. And a documentary included with the special edition DVD I have called The American Nightmare about 70s horror is better than the film itself. I've heard of that documentary, but I've never seen it. I must watch that. The American Nightmare. And Weird Science as well. He popped up in that, if you remember.
He did. Yeah,
bikers, wasn't he?
That's right. Yeah, you know what? I mean, to each their own, right? I mean, there's some older films will resonate with people, some won't. And that's just sort of the way the cookie crumbles. I mean, obviously the remake with, now it's almost 20 years old now itself. And obviously modern effects, modern production value, modern editing, modern pacing, it's going to be more visceral, more intense. And the remake is very good. It's very good. It even has that I forget her name now, but the same large woman that was in the remake of Texas Chainsaw.
Yeah.
All I can think of is my.
It is a remake I actually prefer. I do like The Hills of Eyes, but I prefer the remake. I think the remake
I do too as well.
Bloody good. Yeah, and one of the stronger remakes that came out, amongst that period of time of Halloween, Texas.
Yeah.
What was the other one they did? Friday. I certainly think it's Friday the 13th, wasn't it?
Friday 13th in 09. Yeah. No, it's one of the better ones.
One of the better ones for sure. Okay. And then it was finally released uncut on DVD in 2003, but not technically, because the uncut version was the R-rated version that the US gave us.
Right.
So
gotcha.
Okay, moving on to just 1 second here. Jacob Coronto says the American Nightmare doc is great. You get a lot of insight into Savini's time in Vietnam and how he became was he in Vietnam?
He was.
Just kidding. You wouldn't know it, would you?
No, you wouldn't know.
You get a lot of insight into Savini's time in Vietnam and how he became numb to witnessing violence and gore in person.
Seems like the kind of guy that might just be numb to it anyway. I don't know.
Yeah.
He strikes me as that kind of man.
Yeah. I think he's
gotten
more
all nines. And he's like 85, 72.
Yeah.
How old is he?
I think somebody told me, and this wasn't, this was somebody that booked him, I know, for a convention. And he was signing autographs. There were queue of guys signing all their autographs, not engaging with them, just kind of throwing the autograph along the table so they'd move on. And then there was like a girl in the line. She came up, went, "Hi, Tom," and he went, "Oh, hi."
Tom, you can be a ladies' man,
a bit of a jerk at these things. Apparently, I've heard as he's gotten older, he's become a little more problematic. But I still hang by the fact that years ago, he launched his own website, and I mean years ago. This is like the early days of the internet.
Yeah,
and I there was a Contact Tom button, and I just clicked Contact Tom. I wrote in there, "Oh, Tom, I think you're great. You're one of my heroes." Blah 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 blah. About an hour later, got an email back. "Thanks, man." And it was genuinely him. It was
just "Thanks, man."
Yeah, "Thanks, man." That's all he said. But I was so pleased that he wrote back.
Do you still have that email?
Don't ask me that. No idea. I don't think so. It was probably on some old AOL address that I had or something like that, CompuServe or something. I don't know.
You should walk up to him at a con and say, "Tom, it's me, the Thanks Man guy."
Yeah. "Hey, man, was this you?"
Yeah. Could you imagine? It's on like one of those the printers. What do they call it with the holes on the side? The dot matrix or whatever it is. One of those things. Hey man, is this you? It's like stained yellow. It's got ketchup on it.
Oh dear! Look, Geeked Out Turtles fan 44 says Tom Savini is a great special effects artist, but unfortunately, from what I've heard of late, he has the personality of a pet rock. There you go. And even Jacob says Savini is infamous for being standoffish at cons, which is such a shame because when you see him in his movie and the documentary about him in this Fangoria Screen Greats thing that he did 30 years ago, he seems so personable.
He does.
But now it's just kind of, I mean, you saw that clip of him setting Sean Clark and Chris Nelson on fire with that flamethrower, didn't you?
I did.
Jesus.
I did. And they laugh it off. That was you or I. That'd be a completely different scenario, right?
Oh, God,
just being a scallywag. You know, it's like, well, you know, you got to be careful there, Tommy.
Yeah. John Jones says, my brother-in-law and Tom had Tom as a speaker at the special effects school Savini ran. And my brother-in-law said Savini was super standoffish and barely talked or answered questions.
I wonder if he's always been that way, generally speaking, or if there's, you know, I don't know, maybe there's resentment, maybe some, not resentment, like it's not personal, obviously, because he doesn't know any of us. So it's not personal, but just in a general sense, there's maybe, does he have resentment about his career? Does he wish his career, you know, I don't know, is still going, or it could have gone this way or that way, or does he feel a little weird being at conventions? And I don't know.
I don't know. I don't think it was any decision of his from what I've read, because I've got his book, and it wasn't any kind of conscious decision to. It wasn't the fact that he didn't get offered work.
Right.
He just started to wind down, and then CG took over and things like that.
Right.
And that's when he started to go into acting a little bit. So I think and then obviously his the thing that Nora won, the TV show that he did,
Face Off.
Is that what it's called? Face
Off.
Off?
Well, I don't think he did. Was he a part of Face Off? I can't remember.
Wasn't it something that
Nora
devised initially?
Perhaps the chat room may know. Nora graduated from his makeup school in Pennsylvania, I believe.
Right.
I think it's in Pennsylvania. I know that. I don't know if he was part of Face. Was he part of Face Off? Maybe he was. I'm not sure.
Let me have a look.
Veda, what are you doing here, Veda? Yeah, what's going on, Veda? You want to be on the show?
He was a judge on there, wasn't he? I think.
Oh, maybe he was.
I think he's been a judge on there, but he does have his own school. I know that he has his own. He has his own school. But yeah, I think he pops up from time to time. But
yeah.
Anyway, let's move on. See what your next title is. I have to say, and you know, Dave did pick the title of the show, as you know, is my favorite Nasties. Dave did pick one Nancy. Dave picked one Nancy. Fancy Nancy. Dave did pick one Nasty that I questioned and said, is this really one of your favorites? And you went, well, no, I've seen it. And no, I don't think we should put this as one of your favorites, which we'll talk about in a bit. So Dave has kind of steered closer to the more kind of, I would say, accessible and commercial Nasties, rather than some of the more kind of notorious ones, let's say.
Yes.
And with that in mind, your next one is
Friday the 13th. Yeah, Friday the 13th. And now this is probably the most now, but this was a category, or sorry, a section 2, right? It's a section 2 or 3.
Section 3.
Section 3. Oh yeah, it says right there. Yeah, you have it.
Yeah,
Section 3 video nasty. So
yes, it was. Yeah.
So it was, which is interesting, because when you watch Friday the 13th, you know, there's some gore in that film. I mean, you know, the spear coming through Kevin Bacon's neck, you know, the neck being sliced at the beginning of the movie to poor, I always forget her name. I thought, as a kid, I always thought she was really cute, and I was upset that she died in like the first 10 minutes of the movie. but you know, she got her throat slit, right, and she dies, and then you know, there's some gore. I mean, there's some gruesome stuff, and then of course there is the notorious for the snake death, which Darren has there, which is they kill the real snake. That snake that you see slithering along in the cabin, and I forget who it is now, that takes the machete to it and chops it into two pieces. That was a real snake that they chopped into two pieces.
Yeah.
And, you know, I know snakes are not dogs and cats, and they're not cuddly and cute, and they have that, you know, it's still a fucking animal. It's still an animal, or an animal, you know, reptile, you know, whatever it is. And I'm just like, really? Like you kill the real snake? Like, I mean, whose snake was it? Was it the snake charmer or the snake wrangler that, you know, you brought on set? Was it one you found out in the bushes and you just brought it into the cabin? I don't know. Did you name it? You know, name it, and then it'll be difficult to kill it. You know, call the snake Gary, and then it's like, well, we can't kill Gary, you know. But I was always, I only found out about that, like I said, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and I was like, oh my god. And every time it gets to that scene, I haven't watched the movie too much since then, but I have seen it, you know, a few times since then. I actually feel kind of icky. I'm like, hey, kill the real snake. Like,
and
what
the really annoying thing is about that sequence is that, yes, they kill the snake.
Yeah.
And the movie doesn't address that at all. The ratings board never addressed that. Okay.
Yeah.
They left it in. Fast forward to last year.
Yeah.
And we are not allowed to, we can't have James Cameron's The Abyss on release in this country. Okay.
Ooh, okay.
So that was submitted last year for not his abuse, no. Well, technically it was. It was. But the scene with the rat in the liquid oxygen.
Right.
Which the rat survived. Okay. But they got they refused to give the movie a certificate unless Cameron removes that sequence, and he refuses to remove it.
Right.
And so we're stuck in this country without The Abyss on any decent kind of format. You can still get old DVD versions of it and things like that, but the 4K version we cannot have in this country. And it almost feels like a bit of a double standard, because you're quite happy to have Friday the 13th out there with the snake being killed, but a rat gets distressed for 30 seconds.
And that's because a snake is not, well, depending on who you ask, maybe there's, but it's true, isn't it? You know, we see a kitten or a puppy or a dog or a cat. I mean, look at Beta sitting right over here. She's right here. She's walking towards me right now. You know what I mean? And, you know, do you do that with a snake? Oh, look, a snake. No, you don't. You don't. No, you don't. Right? You know, and I think they didn't care. It's a snake. As what's his face here? Where is it? I think it went by. Somebody in the chat said, if that was a puppy, you'd be losing your minds. You'd be like, oh my god, I just killed a puppy. What the heck is going on? So yeah, I think it's because the rat is I mean, although rats are rats, it's cuter than say a snake.
It is,
and therefore it can affect somebody more emotionally.
It is an odd kind of double standard we have here, because there are, and a lot of the animal cruelty in movies in the UK is down to what can be deemed to be rituals in some countries,
right?
Or maybe sacred deaths, things like that, and that's okay. Like the scene in Apocalypse Now where the cow gets fucking macheted in the back of its head, which is horrible, absolutely, and it's 100% real. No one seems to bat an eyelid at that. That's quite, you know, that's deemed a classic, and there's no issue with the rating. But for some reason,
I'm really glad that wouldn't be allowed today, which is good.
Oh, I mean, would be. Oh, they wouldn't. That would be fine because of the way that it's done. Because
no, I mean allowed in terms of actually happening in a movie.
Oh, I see. Right. Okay. Yeah. So Friday the 13th has, and I saw somebody, I think it was Jacob mentioned it in the chat here. So in the US, Friday the 13th in the cinema, I believe, was cut by 10 seconds to get an R rating. Okay.
Ooh.
But we actually got the uncut version, and
What
which went
10
out in cinemas in the UK.
What 10 seconds were cut?
I will go through that in a second.
Okay, shut up, Dave. All right.
So we released this in the cinemas completely uncut, the unrated version, as it were, and the first versions, the pre-rating or pre-cert, as we call them here, VHS version, this one was released, I believe, in 1982, was unrated as well. And then Warner's played it safe when the moral panic happened with the Video Nasties and withdrew it, and then put it back out there with 10 seconds of cuts and an official 18 rating on it. And those cuts were, and I think it mirrors the US rating, is when Annie has her throat cut, the 18 cert version adds the white out before we get a good glimpse at the Tom Savini created effects. So you know it fades to white.
Yes, yes.
Okay? Kevin Bacon's girlfriend gets an axe in the skull. Once again, this cuts away to an early imposed whiteout. There is about a second more of gory detail in the uncut version. And then a bird's eye view of Kevin Bacon with a spear exiting out of his throat had been censored. This is approximately 4 seconds long. You get a lot more in that uncut version now of Kevin Bacon kind of choking on his blood and everything. Yeah. The current version shows us a side view of his death and jumps before we get the other angle. And then the decapitation of Mrs. Voorhees had been cut. One sequence involving her headless torso. The cut is quite obtrusive, and the sequence had been slightly re-edited so that we cut back to Alice sooner than we should. The sound jumps too, so it's not hard to notice this cut.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so this was then re-released, like I said, in 1983 with those cuts implemented, and then it was released uncut in 2003. And I think all subsequent versions now that come out are the unrated versions.
So it's amazing. So I mean, really, it wasn't until 2003 for you guys in the UK where you were able to see the uncut version,
unless you had that VHS,
right?
Well, no, unless you had that VHS still, which some people, I mean, they're collector's items now,
right?
You know, like I say, they were under the counter jobs at that time.
Yes, yes.
I do remember. I remember
meeting under clock towers at
meeting under the clock tower. I do vividly remember this VHS in UK rental stores, though. I mean, because look at that artwork, and you'll notice as well that it's released in the UK by Warner's.
Yes. Oh, yes. Not Paramount.
Yeah. I think it's subsequently the rights have gone to Paramount now in the UK.
Right.
I'm pretty sure they have.
One by one, they disappeared.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they've now gone back to Paramount. But yeah, and the recent Michael Myers says the recent UK cinema version, which I think was rated in 2023, I had a look at that today, is a 15, and it's apparently the R-rated version again. Oh wow. Okay, so we're going backwards in cinema stuff. This is it. This is what you get with film companies who don't know the history of these things. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
They'll get the movie. We got the movie. Let's put it in. Do you know what I mean? And then they don't realize that it's some version that's been butchered years before, and now it's gone out on re-release. And yeah.
Jeez.
So,
no, it's it doesn't surprise me that it's Section 3, although it kind of does a little bit, maybe. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, it's one that it's, I mean, it's a classic film in its own right, in general, in the horror genre, and there's some gruesome stuff in it for sure.
Yeah. Okay, your final choice is
yes. Hello, Veda. Hi, I'm seeing you. She keeps meowing at me. For those of you that maybe don't know, it's my cat, not like a wife or something. I'm
married to somebody called Vader,
and I'm like, yeah, hi. Anyway, she's looking at me like, don't ever do that again. The Toolbox Murders, so not the Tobe Hooper remake from 2004, which I actually did see, but not in a long time.
Hmm.
This is the original film. And this is, I saw this years ago, and I really liked it. I did. There's some funny moments in it. Like there's a scene where I've always found this where some of the acting is a little theatrical, not quite as theatrical as Alice Sweet Alice. But there's, again, it's that older film, so there is some theatrical acting in it. I don't recall ever seeing any boobs in the movie unless it was in a magazine on the desk. So the cover there that you see is a little misleading.
There is, but the version you may have seen.
Oh, maybe the one I saw was cut down then. Maybe.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I might have seen the cut down one years ago. Then again, it's been a while since I've seen it, so maybe I'm just not remembering it. I'm not sure. But this was more, was it more? I think it was more. Yes. I'd say it was more violent and bloodier than Alice Sweet Alice, more consistently so. And they had there's a scene that I love in it where Joey and what the hell's the other guy's name? The cousin, Kent is his name. Kent. He kind of reminds me. He looks like one of the Brady Bunch actors. Like he should be on. He looks like one of the Brady Bunch actors. Anyway, Joey. I think it's Joey. He comes into the room where the first murder took place, and Kent is at the window, and he's looking out, and it's like he's accentuating his ass or something, and he's looking out the window, and then he walks over and they're talking, but they're talking really close to each other, like, so what do you think we're gonna do? Yeah, I know what you're gonna do. And it's just, I always think it's like nobody stands that close to each other, and I just thought it was kind of funny. But the kills are great in this. Again, theatrical, dated, keep that in mind if you haven't seen the movie. But I've always liked it. I always thought it was creepy, cool guy walking around with this big lunking toolbox. Yeah. And the first time he puts on the ski mask too, it's like crooked and off to the side of his face, so you can kind of only see out of one eye. The music that's playing on the record, is completely the antithesis of anything scary. So it's that contrast, and having that. And I remember when, not the first girl that's killed, but the second one, the one that's killed when she's just in her underwear and like a t-shirt or a shirt or something. There's one, I remember being really surprised. I thought she was going to be I don't know why. I thought she was going to be like our lead, I guess. And because you have the opening kill, and then we switch to this other girl, and who's like a neighbor, and Debbie, I think her name is, or something. And I thought she was really cute. I'm like, oh, she's kind of cute. And then all of a sudden she's like getting hacked in the face with the back of a hammer. And I'm like, oh my God, like I'm all of like 9-10 years old. And I'm just like, holy gee, like, so this isn't the lead either. I'm like, wow, is this just going to be a string of like, and at first I remember watching this movie and thinking, is he just going to go door to door to door to door? I mean, there isn't really going to be like an end or a protagonist. We're just going to see a bunch of, obviously that doesn't end up happening. There is a story that unfolds. And then our lead, her name is Lori, I think. Lori, is it Lori? Lauren or Lori. She's done some acting since then, but she also, I learned too, that she was the voice of Lucy on the Peanuts cartoons, on not all of them, but on like a movie and a few of the shows. Yes. I was the main lead, the girl that gets tied up, and she's tied up for like the whole movie. She doesn't really do anything but get tied up, and she's playing somebody who's 15. She's not 15 at all. She doesn't look 15 at all. They needed Pamela Lynn or whatever her name is from Alice Sweet Alice to be in that spot if you really wanted a convincing 15-year-old, but she looks older. She's dressed like Laurie Strode when we're introduced to her, in the blue collared shirt and the jeans. But it's good. Like, again, it's dated. I don't know which one I like more, Alice Sweet Alice or Toolbox Murders. They're sort of the same kind of quality, I would say.
Around the same time as well, weren't they?
Yeah. Toolbox Murders was 78, and Alice Sweet Alice, I think, was 76 or something like that.
Yeah.
I might like Alice, Sweet Alice a bit more, but this is a good movie, and you know, again, dated, but it's watchable, and it's you know, got some gnarly kills more towards the beginning. Although there's the moment where I'm like, I forget his name now. Joey's the one that I think gets is Lauren. I'm gonna say Lauren for all intents. I think it's Lauren and Joey are brother and sister, and he's searching for her, and then he discovers the toolbox, and he turns to his friend. He's like, "It's your uncle, it's your uncle." And then you realize that, you know, his friend is just as crazy as his uncle, and he literally throws gasoline on him or something, or some sort of, you know, liquid, and he spends the next like 5 minutes saying something like, he's flicking. It's really cool. I wish I could do this. Take a match and just light it with your thumb. You know, he takes matches and lights it with his thumb. And he's saying things like, "Oh, Joey, I'm gonna light you up, Joey." He's walking around this thing and taunting him and teasing him. And I'm like, no, he's not gonna light him. He lights him on fire. He finally throws a, and Joey's like, "Ah!" And I'm just like, oh my God. I'm like, this shit got to. So that got quite intense, you know, towards the end. And I really like, so then he comes back, he ends up killing his uncle, the toolbox murderer, the guy that has done these murders. And then he walks in, and it is shocking. I remember thinking how shocking this was. And the girl that plays Lauren, she does a great job. The tears, the look on her face, she's cute too. So, you know, when you're 10 years old, you're like, she's really cute. And, you know, and then she's got, you know, the thing in her mouth, and he unties it and everything. And she thinks she's home free. I mean, she's like, "Oh, thank you, Ken." I think it's Ken. "Thank you so much, Ken, for saving me. Joey, Mom, I'm saved." And I'm just like, oh God, that's torture, because she's not. Oh my God, you don't realize that this guy's awful. And then it gets really awkward because he starts to come on to her, and he basically, you know, I mean, again, she's not, but the character is supposed to be 15. And I'm just like, and he goes through with it. You don't see it, it's implied, but it's just like, oh, that's brutal. So she goes through this whole thing, and then she gets, you know, got it, the R word. And I was like, oh, that's brutal. But I love the end when they're lying in bed, and it's just happened, and I forget what she says. She says something to him, and he gives the impression, like, she knows that she's not going to leave. He's not going to let her leave. Like, or he's going to kill her, you know, whatever. And she looks over to the nightstand, and she sees a pair of scissors that were the scissors that he used to untie her from her uncle. And she just looks at the scissors, and then just cuts, and you see her walking through an empty parking lot in like early morning or whatever it is, you know what I mean? And she's in the same white dress, and there's blood all over the front of it, and she's carrying the scissors. And I remember thinking, that's great. Like, you don't see her kill him. It doesn't go through this big thing, which is probably what you would see today. But I love the fact that that's all you need. You know exactly what happened. You know what she did. She had to do it. She had to fight for her life. At that point, she probably knew Joey was dead. And then it freezes, and there's this red text that pops up, I think. Or maybe it's white text. I don't know. For some reason, I have it in my head that it's red. I think all the credits are red. And it talks about how this is like based on true events from years earlier or something. But apparently, according to Wikipedia, which I looked up today, there's no one's been able to prove whether this is based on true events or not. So, but it comes up in 1967. This is, but you know, and I'm just like, really? You know, I remember that, and I was like, oh. But anyway, it's maybe it's a little slow in the middle, perhaps. But the opening like 2 or 3 kills are pretty gnarly, and as you have there for the naked nail gun scene, which is pretty wild, and it's porn star Kelly Nichols.
I think. Well, I think that because you said, oh, there's no nudity in this film. I think they cut it all out. It's
been a while since I've seen it, so maybe I'm just misremembering it. But
it was. I mean, it's quite a scene as well. If you've seen it, folks, it was past an X with 6 minutes of cuts, and those 6 minutes were primarily like a chase around an apartment with this girl who is a porn star who they got in to do this scene. And then she's the one that ends up getting the nail gun in the forehead, I think.
Yes.
and it's pretty, it's pretty out there. But this was all removed. I don't think the whole entire scene was removed, but the bulk of the nudity and the kind of
I remember this. I remember this. I think. Is she the one in the bathtub?
Or it could be.
Was
yeah,
she in the bathtub.
I mean,
with the red hair. I think.
I've seen this. Yeah, she's got like a dark bob.
Yes, it's red. It's like a dark red. I think
it could be. Yeah. It's a long time since I've seen it.
Yeah. It's me too.
So that was removed for the cinema. And then the pre-cert VHS, which is the one you can see on the screen there, was that version that went out and then was prosecuted, but the prosecution failed. And so it was relegated to a Section 2 video nasty. Right. It was then released in 2000 with nearly 2 minutes of cuts. I mean, you think about it, 6 minutes of this film was taken out. That is a lot.
It's a lot.
That is a lot.
It's a lot.
It is a lot of the movie.
That's the difference between a 90-minute movie and an 84-minute movie.
Exactly.
Not that this movie's 90, but I mean, if you think of it that way, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And then eventually it was re-released in 2017, completely uncut. And that's the version you get now. I have seen the Tobe Hooper version as well, which I think is dreadful. Mm-hmm. I remember buying it on DVD 20 years ago and getting it and being really excited and thinking, oh, great, he's back to all his machinery again and all this kind of, nah, it's crap. It's
what?
Awful.
Poltergeist? Hooper? Spielberg? What? Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's a dreadful film. Is the remake. The original, from what I can remember, was interesting, and I think Jacob sums it up there. What did he say now? He said, I can appreciate Toolbox as a time capsule, a look at exploitation filmmaking at a specific point in time, but not a good movie otherwise.
I don't know. I mean, it depends, right? I mean, it depends what we're comparing it to.
Well, it sounds like all the exploitation was removed from the version that you saw, Dave.
Yeah, well, I don't think so. I don't think, again, it's been a while since I've seen it, but I remember the girl with the bob in the, and it's been a while, but it's possible. It's possible. But it's not a good movie. Well, it depends what we're measuring it against. It's not a good movie when you're watching modern horror movies today. No. It's dated. It's old. Not that there are great old dated horror movies as well. Yeah. But yeah, it's an exploitative, but it's no worse or better than most of its movies of its kind at that time. I would say. So, but I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Cool. That is your 5. That is your 5 movies.
Yeah,
but since Dave was kind of erring on the side of caution with his titles, which I don't blame him, because you don't want to be on a show entitled My 5 Favorite Video Nasties and start talking about I Spit on Your Grave.
But since this is Darren's channel.
So what we do is, I thought we'd just have a quick look at some of the movies that were on the list, which were all Section 1 and not all of them, but most of them were Section 1 and prosecuted and removed from our shelves. I think the majority of them are available, and 1 or 2 of them are available, but cut still. And the reason they're cut still is because of animal cruelty, I think, is the main reason.
Right.
Which a lot of those kind of cannibal movies in the late 70s, early 80s, for some reason, they were obsessed with putting scenes of animals being tortured, eaten, beaten, that kind of stuff, as a kind of selling point for them, which is really sad. But as a nation of animal lovers, we remove that stuff from our movies. So,
before we go on, I forgot to mention too something cool about Alice, Sweet Alice, which I absolutely really like that movie. Is the mother? I forget her name now. Lauren Miller. Lauren Miller, I think, is the actress's name. It was the wife to Jason Miller of Exorcist fame.
Okay.
And she is the daughter of Jackie Gleason.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Pretty crazy.
And the mother of Jason
Bette Midler. No.
From the Lost Boys.
Jason Patrick.
Patrick. That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And I agree with what Jacob said there, that if we're comparing it to Alice, Sweet Alice, I agree with you. I think it is. I think Alice, Sweet Alice is a better film than the Toolbox Murders. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. Michael Myers says this one was banned purely on the title and cover. There was nothing left in the film worth banning. Yeah, especially with 6 minutes removed from it.
I know.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of this, we'll talk about this now, I think. Let's move on to our next slide, which is, a lot of these movies were quite notorious. I mean, this one is, the score for this movie is fucking amazing.
Yeah, it is.
Like the score for this movie is fantastic. The film itself, a lot of people really hold this film in high regard. However, the animal stuff in there is just, that's the part that I can't get beyond. It was on TV recently over here, completely uncut.
On the Family Channel.
On one of the channels. But yeah, you can't buy it completely uncut over here.
Right.
Which is
interesting.
Just odd. But yeah, Cannibal Holocaust was one of the ones that was... The interesting story about this was that the distributor of this film sent a copy of this movie to a lady called Mary Whitehouse, who you would have seen on that documentary. She was a kind of how would you call her? How would you describe her? She was like she was all against the uprising of a sort of permissive society and all that kind of stuff, and was all about good Christian values, and she was a fucking nuisance, and nose into every
a busybody.
Yeah, exactly. And so the distributor of this movie thought, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send her a copy of this film to watch so that she'll go on about how fucking disgusting this film is and that you shouldn't see it and everybody should burn this.
And then people will go out and see it.
Exactly. Yeah. But that what he did, sending that to her, triggered the whole moral panic thing.
Wow.
Because that's when the police and the Department of Public Prosecution, the DPP, and the lawyers and the politicians and Sir Graham Bright and all that kind of stuff started getting involved, and that's when the whole thing started to cave in. So the distributor of this film, is one of the catalysts for the whole video nasty debacle. Yeah, it's interesting. That was one of the poster boys. Along with that was also Driller Killer, which is quite boring and one of the movies I would say doesn't live up to
which is unfortunate because the cover looks like Pavarotti is getting a drill to the forehead.
Or Frank. But if you look closely, and I also remember this in VHS magazine. Yeah, when I was a kid, I was obsessed with buying Video Today and VHS magazines, and as you got to the back of them, they would become more adult and things like that. And with this particular one, I always was obsessed with this picture because if you look closely, the drill bit on that drill, I think it's like a drinking straw.
It kind of does look like
which
that.
I think is just pumping the blood out all over his head.
It could be. It could be. And from a certain point of view, the title looks like it's The Dr. Iller K. Iller. The doctor. Wah. Good night, everybody. I'll be here all week.
The Dr. Liller. Kalilla.
Excuse me. The Dr. Yeah, the Dr. Lur K. Lur. Yeah. Where I got Iller from, I don't know. I think I was using the middle graphic, but no, it looks like this poster, this cover. If I just saw this, I would think, it's exploitative, bloody, gory.
And it's exactly what it was. It was this Abel Ferrara who directed it. It was a mad exploitation film about a guy living in an apartment complex who was just getting driven around the bend by his. I don't know. It's a long time since I've seen it, so I'm going back into my head here to remember what it was about. But it was people playing music too loud and things like that, and then he just goes on this kind of rampage. But the film kind of ends like they ran out of money or something. It just sort of stops. It's weird.
It just stops.
But he's since done movies like Bad Lieutenant, I think he did he do Miss 45 as well? I'm pretty sure he did, about the nun who goes on the rampage after she's assaulted. But oh yeah, there you go. I love Ferrara's Miss 45. Yeah. What else have we got here? There we go.
One of my favorites.
Another one of the poster boys. Do you know who that lady is there?
That is it Demi Moore?
It is, apparently. So so people say that she was the girl that was used for the photo shoot for that.
Now, how old would she have been?
This was 78, I imagine. I think she's like 62, 3 or something like that at the moment.
Just do a quick.
So she would have been like late teens, I would have thought.
Demi Moore was born she's 62. She was born in 62. So 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So yeah, she would have been maybe 16 here.
Yeah.
Interesting.
All right. Say no more.
Yeah. No, I'm not. I'm just stating facts, folks. Just stating facts.
Rando says, I love I Spit on Your Grave, but good Lord, it's a tough watch. It is a tough watch. It's a horrible, grubby little watch. It's one of those films that, and it was interesting because the documentary that's out there about the Nasties, where Neil Marshall, the director, says it's one of those films he's only seen once and he was shocked by it and he doesn't want to go back to watch it. Not because it's because of the content, but just because he doesn't want to spoil that feeling he has for the movie. You know what I mean?
Right.
But yeah, it was. Oh, she shot that poster in 81. She was 19. Cool. Okay. There you go. Thanks, Brandon.
There you go. Makes me wonder what the poster was in 78 then.
Well, it was. I'm not sure where the movie was originally called Day of the Woman.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
And I think it was when the Nasties started, when video started to take off and the Nasties and all that kind of stuff, people started to cash in on titles, on artwork and things like that and exploit them as much as possible. And they would also take titles that had been released maybe 10 years before and kind of re-release them with different titles and different artwork just to sort of trick people into renting them and that.
Correct. Yes. Yes, it's true.
But
no, it's a hard watch, and I think what makes it even a harder watch in a lot of ways is the fact that it's a dated older film. So you have the subject matter that is very what it is. And when you put that subject matter against a dated film with its production value more raw and more it almost feels more real.
That's the thing.
Yes, because it's raw and old and it's very disturbing. It doesn't feel as cinematic.
And when you get a version that's been rented so many times and the quality of it degrades and you have problems with tracking and there's sparkle all over the place and pictures going like that, it makes the thing that bit more grubby as well, doesn't it?
Yes, almost like you're watching a home movie.
Yeah, and that's what the problem is a lot of the time
of this event actually.
Happening. Yeah. And that's what kind of spoils sometimes these 4K versions, which I think are wonderful, and I love to collect them. Not this particular title, but like I'm looking at getting The Blob at the moment, and there was what else was I looking at getting? There was another title I looked at this morning. Humanoids from the Deep. I'm just about to order, and I love watching them. But it does take away something about that first time of watching it on a VHS. And
I felt the same way when I watched the remake of I Spit on Your Grave, and from 2010 or whatever it was. And it's a tough watch. I mean, they've done a good job. I mean, the subject matter is tough no matter what. And so no matter, it's tough, and they did a good job. But it wasn't quite as, and maybe it's because I'm older and I'm watching it as I'm older and I have a different perspective as opposed to when I was younger, when I watched this, not like young, but as a teenager, whatever it was. But there's something very visceral and real about the gratuitous violence against a woman, seeing it in a very low budget presentation that makes it feel like you're just actually watching somebody's found footage, and that can be quite disturbing. Whereas the remake is still disturbing, but it still looks and feels and plays and presents like a movie.
Yeah. I actually do like the remake.
I did too.
I thought it was nicely done.
I actually watched all three of them, and I can't really remember them now, which is weird. But I did think they did a good job.
Yeah. Happy birthday, Danita. Thanks for watching. Good to see you on here.
It's your birthday. Happy birthday, Danita.
Hope you have a lovely day.
Yeah.
And then Jacob says, in the original film, her revenge felt believable. In the remake, they turn her into a criminal mastermind, and the kills are way too elaborate.
Well, that's I mean, that's
have like a shotgun up some guy's ass or something like that.
But that's the remake for you, right? It's modern.
Yeah.
Modern is in 15 years ago, and so it's gonna be presented and executed with modern sensibilities and storytelling and all that. But that first film, like it feels like a snuff film, really. That you just found in your you found in, I was gonna say something really bad. You found somewhere. I'll just say, yeah.
Zombie Flesh Eaters, Fulci's classic. I love this film.
I have not seen this one.
Oh, it's great, Dave. You should watch it. It's one of those ones where, in the late 70s, early 80s, Italians went over to the US, did a load of kind of like second unit footage of the Manhattan skyline, and then went off somewhere else and filmed the movie. So they bookend it in parts of America. But this is
Dawn of the Dead or Zombie Flesh Eaters.
Two different types of zombie movies altogether. Like this movie, when it was first released, was released under the title Zombie 2, and was trying to cash in, even though it was filmed, I think, the same year as Dawn of the Dead, was trying to cash in on Zombie Dawn of the Dead as the sequel to it, as like an unofficial sequel to it. And so you will see a lot of versions say Zombie on it or Zombie 2.
Interesting.
In the UK, it was called Zombie Flesh Eaters. There's something about Fulci's zombies that really creep me out. There's something about the makeup that he uses. There's a real kind of grubbiness to them. The makeup, some of the scenes in this film with the visual effects are fantastic.
I'll have to check it out.
is really raw and nasty. But yeah, it's a really good fun film.
Okay.
I love the fact that they're starting to put stickers on there as well. Strong uncut version.
I was just gonna say, it's the strong uncut, not just uncut version, a strong uncut version.
Yeah. The Evil Dead was a massive, a big deal in the UK, and that was the one that I mentioned earlier, which went to court, and the producers and Palace Video stood in the dock and defended it and won. It didn't get prosecuted, and so it got declassified. It got downgraded to a Section 2 release.
It's striking to me that this was even a Section 1 to begin with.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think it's anything more, problematic than, say, Friday the 13th or something.
No. And the thing is that they a lot of the time were going on titles and artwork, and and I the first time I heard about this, I was in the local swimming pool, and a friend of mine turned and went, "Oh, we watched The Evil Dead last night. Oh, it was fantastic. They were knocking heads off with shovels and all this kind of stuff." And I went, "Ooh, this sounds like my kind of thing." And it took me ages to find a copy of it. It was one of those ones that just vanished from the shelves, and you had to really have a good relationship with your local video store or your dealer in order to get The Evil Dead. But yeah, it was It was one of the more popular ones.
I love the artwork of these. You know, I miss, this is just a bit of a side note, but I miss the golden age of not just with horror, but just movies in general. You know, when artwork, it was paintings or drawings, and this kind of stuff is just so. I mean, if this was released today, it would just be a bunch of the 3 lead actors with their heads floating in space. You know what I mean? It's, you know, but this is so great.
I think that's Graham Humphreys, who's a British artist who did that. He did the Nightmare on Elm Street UK artwork and the Elm Street 2 UK artwork. So he's kind of well known for doing a lot of this stuff. So because it's completely different to the US, which was the hand coming out of the ground.
Yes.
I guess you got that in Canada as well.
Oh yeah.
Next one was one that kind of made the press quite a lot in the UK. A movie called Snuff, which
not on the nose at all.
Which was a South American movie. What was the? If you read the back of the box, it said a movie coming from South America. Well, life is cheap. That was on the trailer as well. Now, this movie has a bit of a history to it. So it was a regular kind of crappy horror film, which the filmmakers I think it was correct me if I'm wrong, but a few years later they added a sequence to the end of the movie after the credits had passed, whereas it was almost like the cameras were still rolling after the film had shot,
right,
where they pin a woman down and torture her and rip her insides out. And if you look on the front of this, it says the original legendary atrocity shot and banned in New York. And then there's a message at the bottom that says the actors and actresses who have dedicated their lives to making this film were never seen or heard from again. Now, if you watch this sequence, and it is poor, back then, as you said, when you've got a second generation copy of it, you can't quite make out what's going on, and you're just seeing loads of screaming and red stuff and people throwing sausages around, which is actually what it was. There's a scene there where they actually take a pair of wire cutters and cut a finger off, which is quite nasty, until later on in the scene, the finger's back on. Right. And it's off again, and then it's back on again, and then you can see where they've dug a hole in the bed to put her, and it's just like, it's so poorly done.
Right.
But it was one of those ones that everybody had to get their hands on because people really died in it.
Of course, it was a Blair Witch before Blair Witch, in a lot of ways.
Exactly, and I remember this in the newspapers in the UK at the time. And I remember my dad bringing it home and him and my mum watching it. And I was like, can I watch it? Can I watch it? And my mum was like, it's rubbish. Don't worry. It's nothing. It's just, it's crap. It is. The movie's junk.
Admittedly, it's another one I have not seen, but I have heard of this movie, and I have heard about its legendary sort of status with some of the things involved with it.
Yeah, Michael Myers said, Snuff got rated 18 and cut a while ago in the UK, but never got released. Rando says Snuff is one of the worst on the list. Really, I'm going to
start searching for it this afternoon. We're getting a big snowstorm here today and tomorrow, so I'm going to have some movie watching to do.
I think if you just went on YouTube, you could probably see that final scene. It's probably on there, I would have thought. But finally, folks, I wanted to share this one for you, which is my favorite. And it's not a video nasty, believe it or not. This is just it's not. No. This is just an example of how wild things got in the 80s when there was no regulation. They would just bring out a poster artwork for any movie and kind of exploit it as much as possible to kind of get the rentals in and things like that. And it's for a movie which this wasn't the original title, I don't believe. I think it's a South American film, if I remember right, which was retitled. The artwork was redone and everything. I think it's probably
South Americans.
Yeah, it's probably a really crappy little film. I've never seen it. The runtime is a little over than an hour, but I just love what they did with the artwork. Now, the artwork's not very politically correct whatsoever, but it's just an example of what the times were like before the advertising standards agency got their hands on this kind of stuff.
The chat room has stopped because they're waiting in anticipation right now. There's nobody. It's not moving. It's just everybody is just now on the edge of their seat.
Okay, so this is a movie called The Violation of the Bitch.
But she asked for it. I just, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, she asked for it. So,
Isn't that dreadful?
This will be, I'm planning on doing the remake. My first feature will be a remake of Violation of the Bitch. The contract's been signed. We're doing casting now. No. I mean, I asked for it. So I thought, God, I mean,
look at the chat room. Everybody's laughing. And the most offensive poster of all time goes to...
Yep, that's right. Violation of the
worst,
Bitch.
Worst tagline of all time.
Yes, for it. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I mean, and the way she's just, to be fair, I mean, not to be fair. I don't think you can be fair with anything like this, but it looks like she's grabbing the ankle of another woman.
It does. That's what's confusing about it. And why are her boobs falling out? I don't know. It's just the way it's sketched.
It's the way it's sketched. It's the way it is. It's the way. Violation of the Bitch.
Oh,
she asked for it.
Dave, thank you. That was a
no
lot of
problem.
Fun.
That was a lot of fun.
That was a lot of fun. It's a big cultural thing over here. I just wanted to show you there are all sorts of books and artwork things you can. I mean, this is just full of all the
that's a cool
sleeves
book.
and then this one here, which is a massive book, which is just full of the history of all the issues that we had in Cannibal Era. It's a really good title, I think.
Wow,
because it was a real big fuck up. And then my favorite, which is my Bible, is called The Art of the Nasty.
That's so cool.
Which has all the different covers for every.
Cool. Oh, no, right there. Don't Go Into the Woods is one of the worst movies I've ever seen in my life. I've talked about it on my own channel. Bruce, my friend who you guys know, his mom had that movie, Don't Go Into the Woods, on VHS. We watched it one night thinking it was going to be a Friday the 13th, and it was dreadful.
Yeah,
it was boring and long, and we laughed at the effects, and the guy's hose is coming out of his shirt. You could see the blood spraying, and it was awful. Anyway,
and it's still on the list, on the Section 1 list. But it was released in 2007, uncut as a 15. Which the 15-year-old kids can buy that. I mean, what 15-year-old kid would want to buy it? I've no idea, but
it's dreadful. Dreadful. But that's a cool book. That's a cool book.
It is. I mean, there's loads of them out there. Like I say, it was a huge cultural thing in the UK, and a big part of our history in the early 80s. There was a lot of change.
I learned a lot by watching that documentary, and I've learned a lot by just sort of in preparation for the show, just kind of doing a bit of reading and learning about it. And it was a big deal, a really, really big deal over there. And to see that culture shift, sort of, although some films still, I'm sure, kind of get cut down, but to see that culture shift and see the unrated things being re-released, as our societies soften, as more gratuitous violence comes in other ways by action movies and, whatever the case is, you realize that maybe some of these movies weren't so bad. And sometimes it's not even the gratuitous gore. It can just be the subject matter, like I Spit on Your Grave, for example, is just the intensity of the subject matter can really be intense. But really interesting to learn about the video nasties. I think that's such a great term.
Yeah, cool. And Brandon's asking what's the name of the documentary. The documentary is actually on YouTube. There are actually two documentaries, which I think I have right here.
It's called
Moral Panic, the Video Nasties Definitive Guide. And then there's the part 2, which they brought out about 3 or 4 years later, which is interesting as well. But what I'm going to do is I've just posted a link in the chat
Okay. And by the
that's
way,
link to the documentary.
Peter Kruger, the head of Obscene Publication Squad of Scotland Yard from 1981 to 1984, looks like a little bit like Zod from Superman 2.
Oh, Terrence Stamp.
Yeah.
He's a dick, is that guy? Some of the stuff he was coming out with, he was a big problem in all of this as well.
Peter Kruger. Well, his name's Kruger. I mean,
yeah. But check it out, Brandon. Let me know what you think. There's a great talking head on there. I can't remember his name now. He's the kind of university guy with the beard who speaks so well in favor of the Nasties throughout the movie. And I looked him up again today just to see what he's up to now, and he apparently passed away 2 years ago, which is
that's too bad.
Sad. Yeah, because he's the hero of this documentary, and it's a good watch. It's a good watch, folks.
Right, it is good. It is good. Yeah, and it's only about an hour long. So
yeah, I think it's about 69 minutes or something. So Dave, this was a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on. It was no problem.
Thank you for about this. Yeah, thank you for having me on. It's I love what you're doing with the channel, and it's growing, which is great. And the content you're putting out, and the 10-minute rankings and all this. I mean, it's really a lot of fun. And so I was very honored to come on as your first guest. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Now I've got to find a second.
There you go. Yep. Now it's all downhill from here. Now it's all.
I actually do have a guy who has his own channel, who's a British guy who's a real kind of knowledge base on the Nasties, and he's agreed to come on. So I'm looking forward to having him on. Hopefully in the next couple of weeks. So he has every single one.
Oh, well,
he owns every single one.
So so you've started here, and now you're going up, which is great. I mean, that's great. He's going to be able to talk about it from perspectives I don't even know. So that's awesome.
Folks, thank you so much for tuning in. I think we peaked at about 65 people in here, which is amazing. Really amazing that so many of you decided to tune in for this. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for. If you've liked, thank you very much. If you've subscribed, thank you very much. If you haven't, maybe consider it. I shall see you. Yeah, maybe consider it. Maybe. Like Frank is. Frank's still considering it.
He's still considering it.
He sent me a note a few weeks ago. Right? Yeah, great channel, man. I may subscribe. Thanks, buddy. Thanks.
That's great.
Okay, guys. Thanks very much. I'll see you all soon.